Hello to everyone, and in today's video we're going to be continuing taking a look at what if civilization started over again in another world. And if you're confused as to why the Purple Nation, or as we now call it Etros, has disappeared and why there is a line in the middle of the ocean going nowhere, I really recommend you watching the last episode, as it's going to explain most of the questions you have about Etros and why there is a line in the ocean. Before we start the video though, I have to announce, again, I'm sorry for doing this way too many times, but I thought about it and I think that there should be a year, as I believe is going to give more meaning to the world like that. Now that that's out of the way, we can actually start taking a look at how the world would progress. So the first event that what we're going to be taking a look at in today's episode is going to be the colonization of southern Eludia by Whatif and Vexash. Now that Vexash has the funds and the explorers to actually start fully exploring stuff in the south of Eludia, they'll do that. And eventually after some time they're going to explore this much land in southern Eludia. However, they won't just explore it for the sake of it, they actually want to colonize it. So the first thing that they're going to do is going to just take over this region over here. After that, they're going to turn their gaze to the east, aka this region here, and they're also going to just colonize a majority of it. And that's roughly how much they colonize out of this region. They're also going to colonize some parts of this region over here. That's what they colonize. And finally, a little point of tension between Vexash and Whatif is going to occur over here. You see, Whatif has claimed this region as their own, however, Vexash did not deem it that way. And so they have expanded roughly about this much into this region. About half of this region that Whatif has claimed is now under Vexash's rule. The only thing stopping Vexash from actually fully taking this region over is Whatif's own expansion into this region. Speaking of that, through the treacherous terrain of southern Eludia's rainforests, Whatif has expanded their influence all the way over here, even setting up two important cities on the coastline of the rainforests over here. So, as an act of aggression and desperation from Whatif's side, Whatif actually sets up an important city directly on the borders of the disputed areas between Whatif and Vexash. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that there's 3 new cities set up over here in Vexash. Which itself is kind of crazy because Vexash has so much territory yet so little important cities compared to others. Moving further to Himalaya, they themselves are actually going to start exploring these regions over here. Okay, editor me here, I've went a little bit way too overboard with describing how Himalaya and the Yeti as well have colonized these regions, and I've talked about it for 6 minutes or something like that. So I'm just going to save you some time over here and just tell that basically Himalaya has split their explorer groups into 3, north, south and central. They meet up with Yeti, as you can see on the clip right here, and then they find another river, and then they go all the way to the south through the jungles, and that's where they stop eventually for now. Now finally, moving to the actual politics of the world, and the first event is going to be happening in Himalaya, specifically these regions over here. So because there's a lot of colonization happening by Himalaya, and a lot of colonies are getting settled, specifically these ones over here, which literally outnumber the population of all of these colonies over here, there are gonna be instabilities in Himalaya, especially this island over here. And these instabilities eventually result to a civil war. A civil war to decide the fate of this central island, the island which houses Himalaya's capital, the Blue Revolution. It's going to start off in the north, however it will make its way down south, eventually taking over these cities over here. It is going to be stopped on this river, and in the north it's going to get stopped around the mountains in this area. The small island is going to actually partake in this revolution and is going to join them. However, this historical island is not going to join the revolution. Instead, it is going to get captured by Ikalga as they join on the side of the revolution. This itself absolutely enrages the population and Himalaya as a whole, while also showing to the whole world, but most of all to these nations, Latsu, Latros, Squet, as well as Untas and Anakt, how opportunistic Ikalgar truly is. And because of this, both Untas and Anakt are going to join this alliance that Latros has set up. This is actually bad for Ikalgar because they have a goal in mind, and that goal is Greater Ikalgar. Their goal is to have more or less these lands under their control, or control of a puppet state. And guess what this Blue Revolution in Himalaya is? Anyways, continuing with the civil war in Himalaya, the rebellion has managed to break through the defenses of Himala in the north and has reached nearly the capital of Himala, while in the south they have also breached because of the breach in the north, leaving Himala with just their capital to defend. Himala is speculating that someone is definitely aiding these rebels, as no rebels just starting from these two cities are going to overrun the main island that Himala controls, unless there is aid involved. It is then that they realize that Ikalga has been behind this all along, them taking their land, this important and historical island, this island as well with their little calling here, them aiding the rebels and maybe even orchestrating them in the first place, but it's too late. Himala's capital falls. Now they're left just to these lands, where they make their new capital, and the capital was here, so the rebels are not going to be able to get to it with Ikalga as well. But that move kind of was a pointless, well not pointless, but the move was kind of not necessary, as the war has grinded to a halt, which in return led to a peace treaty between the two sides and Ikalga as well. And this is a peace treaty, so nothing much has happened, it's literally just a stalemate at the border here, and the rebellion has a name now, and it's gonna be Hictup. Ikalga isn't done just taking some little islands from Himala and setting up a potentially vassal state in Himala. They also want land from Vagzash. See, ever so after that humiliating defeat that Ikalga has suffered from Vagzash, where Vagzash took over these 3 cities, Ikalga just couldn't forgive Vagzash and themselves. So what do? They developed their military. Vagzash did see that coming, however not to the extent of what Ikalga actually does. And by that I mean that before, Vagzash used to be the number 1 military, and Ikalga used to be the number 3 military behind Whatif. However now, Ikalga is number 1, Vagzash is number 2, and Whatif is number 3. That's how much they developed their military. After roughly 2 years since the Himala and Hictup civil war happened, Ikalga is going to have some demands to Vagzash. Knowing that they have a major dispute with Whatif, they tell Vagzash if they do not give these regions, then they're going to invade with Whatif. Vagzash doesn't believe that, and to be fair, that was actually a bluff from Ikalga. They know that Whatif would probably not do that, just over these little disputes. So they're just forced to invade Vagzash on their own. They did see that coming, after all. So the first thing on the front lines to happen is that Ikalga just straight out blitzes to this city, takes it over, and cuts out this city. By doing that, Ikalga basically separates this city from the rest of Vagzash, and therefore the supply to the city is very limited, as they have basically full naval dominance in this sea. Speaking of naval dominance, they actually make a landing over here, and they try to take over this city, as well as link with the front line over here, which they do successfully. However, this city, there is a fight over there. Brutal, obviously, for Vagzash, because the civilians didn't want to become a part of Ikalga again, so civil obedience. And Ikalga knows how to deal with it. We do not speak what happened in this city. All I can say is that the population of the city has dropped by about 33% or 1/3. Anyways, this city here is very easy to invade and just take over, because most actually wanted to be a part of Ikalga, and there just wasn't any supply over here. After the city is taken over by Ikalga, all of this territory is basically up for grabs, and Ikalga just takes it over. Meanwhile, in the south, from this region, Ikalga attempts to link up over here. However, this city here prevents that from happening, so they try to take this city over, which utterly fails for the first time. Same the second time, and now let's just move over to the north again. Oh dear, Vagzash is really losing. However, now their armies are finally on the front lines, so they can actually defend their cities. Before, it used to be mostly in the south, just trying to populate these regions. Do not ask me why, but it was just in the south. Now it's in the north. However, because of Ikalga's brilliant strategists and generals in general, that they've managed to find a weakness in Vagzash's defenses, and this weakness was over here. Because of that, they managed to push some soldiers into this region and make the front line very hard to defend for Vagzash. And with that, Vagzash was quite literally forced to evacuate from this major city all the way to a somewhat defendable frontier, which was this river here. This does not mean that there was no guerrilla warfare in this city and this region as a whole. Ikalga was prepared for that to happen, so they would get the same treatment as this city. Now, Ikalga would actually start to move their soldiers further down south, up to a point where only this city was located. Now Ikaga was actually moving down south at a really rapid pace, so much so that Vexash actually couldn't keep up that much. However, where they could keep up was this city over here, and the defense of it. Eventually the front lines looked something like this, and after some more time, they only looked like this. There isn't that much army in this city, however the city itself was so defensible that they actually did hold out for quite a long time. And the best thing about this city was that they had a lot of food. So much food that if Ikaga would try to siege it, it would take roughly 5 years to siege it. So instead they've opted for a different option, a takeover. So this is the map of the city and the borders of Ikaga and Vexash. And now these are the borders right now. So we can see from this, as Ikaga has basically a whole armada on the city's doorstep just to enter it. Around 30,000 people. And the city's army is around 5,000 people, which is around half of the city's population. But still they are vastly outnumbered by Ikaga, 6-1 to be precise. So the first action Ikaga is going to take is to try and sever this part of the city from the main part of the city, aka the city center. So they've quickly managed to capture these parts of Vexash. However, dealing with the city walls was a whole different problem. It took about 2 months for Ikaga to finally get into the city itself. However, after capturing this little corridor that was connecting this part of the city to this one, they stumbled on another problem. The city was so heavily fortified that there were literally walls inside of the city as to prevent these kinds of risks happening. So for example, if a little part of the city is being broken into, it will not jeopardize the whole city's security because of it, which is pretty smart. However, Ikaga wasn't just sitting around while trying to capture this little portion of the city. They were focusing on to breaking into this part of the city as well. So from 3 separate sides, Ikaga has managed to breach the city walls, and therefore with little to no resistance they have managed to capture this area of the city. So just in around 4 months, the city looked something like this. Not long after, Ikaga has managed to breach these city walls as well. However, in a shocking twist of events for Ikaga, the warriors of this city actually have planned for this. Because of their impatience, they have lured the Ikagan soldiers into believing that this was actually a breakthrough, when in reality, it was just a ploy to divide and conquer the Ikagan army. The soldiers were quickly encircled and dispatched off by Vexash. Yet despite these valiant efforts, they have just won 1 battle, not the whole war. Ikaga has managed to capture this little island, and therefore threaten the stability of all of this river, which they quickly take advantage of by naval invading 2 provinces, from here and here. Since the city warriors of Vexash weren't prepared for this outcome to happen, they were essentially defenseless against it. Therefore, Vexash actually managed to even breach this area over here. And in just 2 months, all of this area has fallen to Ikaga's control. Now, a quick note is that there was a lot, and I mean a lot, of civil disobedience in these areas. And so Ikaga has basically utilized their methods of pacifying civilians as usual, however to a more extreme in this city especially, as this city had especially brutal executions of this method. Around 60 to 70% of the people in these areas were pacified, if you know what I mean by pacified. Meanwhile, Ikaga, via the spy network, has learned about the plans of Vexash to liberate the city from this siege. And so they have deliberately prevented that from happening, and that was deemed to happen by this river, as Ikaga wasn't monitoring this river very much, which would allow some fleets to land over here and then quickly liberate the city from the siege. Now this plan was basically impossible, as Ikaga was monitoring the rivers much more heavily. After about 2 months of fighting, the city looked something like this. More than half was already under Ikaga's control, and around 20 to 30% of all civilians that lived in the city were slaughtered. You see, it was now that Ikaga has offered the city a compromise. Either you surrender now, and we are going to be merciful to your population and everybody that is still left in here, or you do not surrender and will continue this brutal war against your population and everybody in the city. The people that have been oppressed by Ikaga have chosen to not surrender and to fight until their last breaths. Very admirable, I will say. But this is not just because they wanted to be a nuisance to Ikaga and essentially die trying to be it. It was that this city was very important to Vexash as a whole. This city was the birthplace of the idea to rebel away from the Orange Nation, now we know it as Latros, and become independent. Thus, it was very important for Vexash. After the Ikagan queen has heard the refusal of her essentially ultimatum to the city, she was furious, so she doubled down on the siege of the city. Just a few weeks later, this was the map of the city. Only the city center has remained, and this little area over here. And Finally, after 14 months of this brutal campaign against the city, only the city center remained, this little part. And the next day, even the city center surrendered to Ikalga. Out of the 10,000 inhabitants that lived in this city before the war has started, about 2,000 have remained alive. These news reached not just Vakzash, but the whole entire known world. Even the Aptorium gets a word of the massacre that happened in that city. And that is impressive. Aptorium has been trying to stay hidden for such a long time, yet even it received the news of it. The only people that do not hear about this massacre of the city are the Ikalgan people themselves. This monarchy has turned into an absolute dictatorship. And finally, with the fall of this city, Ikalga and Vakzash finally signed a peace treaty. However, Vakzash actually was begging Ikalga to sign a peace treaty before, and Ikalga was actually denying the peace treaty, even if Vakzash would give basically the lands that they want, including the city that just was massacred, but they didn't want to accept that. They wanted the city to be gone forever. And yeah, this is pretty messed up from Ikalga's side, to be honest. Yikes. We just got one dictatorship replaced with another one. This is so bad. Oh my god. And without skipping a beat, Ikalga teams up with Whatif to take down this alliance, which includes Latsu, Latros, Shwets, Untas, and Enact. Not only does Whatif join, Hiktup, their newest friend, or should I say vassal state, joins on their side. And with that, there is another conflict in this region, which is basically every day. But we're going to come back to this conflict probably in the next episode, as there's not much time left and I still want to show what's happening to Aptorium. So first, Aptorium is going to fully colonize this island, even with the mountain ranges over here. Why even with the mountain ranges? That's because I'm just not bothered making borders for the mountain ranges, so yeah. And with that, 2 new cities here are settled up in the jungles, as this is basically, well not basically, but this is just the best natural harbor that's probably on the island. After all of this island is colonized by the Aptorium, mainly the explorers on the island start to look to the oceans. So they started to explore. The first successful expedition was around in the year 147. It was done by some sailors that didn't even want to participate in this. They just didn't. And because they did not, fate would make it so that they would actually start to explore new land. Obviously they didn't have many supplies, but the ones that they actually had were enough just to take them back home. They did tell the emperor, as always, and countless explorers started to go to this region over here. And at first the interest wasn't the biggest. However, after exploring about this much land and just seeing a jungle, the interest wasn't big at all. It actually started to go down. However, they did find a river. Just like the old times when they found this river, they for some reason had a frenzy and just started exploring the river all the way up to the mountain over here. And by the end of the year 150 AC, they've explored about this much land. Thankfully, it was... okay, never mind. I was about to say it was not half of their country. It was probably more than half of their country. Jesus Christ. You guys love to explore, apparently. Oh, and this was just one expedition that they have sent out. After the realization that there's actually much more land over to the south, they've started to explore the coastline. And that was like all the way up to here. So, yeah. And after finding a river again, you guessed it, they have again colonized half of the rivers. However, they thankfully for the rivers were quite literally becoming impassable terrain. It's like when you go too deep into the Amazon rainforest and the rivers are just impassable. So yeah, the rivers were spared this time. Now, of course, they didn't just explore this land just for like knowing what's happening in the world. They wanted power, so they wanted colonies, and so they have set them up. And these are the colonies that have been set up by the Aptorium. One is half of their size, and another one is small, but it doesn't matter. The key thing is that they did not learn their lesson and they're going to colonize like hell. However, now they can't do much about that, at least the people, because the emperor has learned his lesson, not about colonizing a lot and not giving a crap about their people, but just having a stricter control on their people. Yikes. And now we're going to move on to the last bit of the video, the cultural map and how it has evolved. And this is the cultural map of this world in the year 157 AC. So right off the bat, we could probably dismiss the Aptorium because it's just gonna be one single culture, and it's gonna be the Aptorium culture, or you can say the Etros culture. So looking at the old world now, we can see that actually cultures have changed. So this is the cultural map alongside the political map, and this is the cultural map without the political map. So we can see that the Etrosian influence on the old world has substantially subsided, especially in their new colonies here, which have formed their own identity. Meanwhile, the culture from this island over here has spread to Untas and this little island over here, as well as this island over here too. And this is more or less good, as this culture is a mix of basically every culture, and this is gonna be really good for Untas, because this was the birth of civilization and there's gonna be a lot of cultures, and if you mix the cultures together here, then the population is gonna be generally much more happier here. Moving to the west, the Vexatious culture has basically dominated over here in the west, and the Latros culture has significantly expanded in the south, where Wotan has colonized, as well as kicking the Etruscan culture out. Well, nearly out. There's still one city over here in the south. And this was it for this video. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at the war between the Orange Alliance and Ikalga and Wotan. Who's gonna win? Only time will tell. And by time, I mean the next episode. And if you liked this episode and how it turned out, you can always subscribe and like this video. So yeah, I hope you have a nice day, and see you next episode. Goodbye.